fundamentally speaking, a cover for a book and the book, it's the same process. There's no difference between the two. You're still probably printing them on the same press. You're probably still using all the same processes. You're using the same papers. But the difference is usually you make all sorts of different choices for the cover. So it's not like there's a special cover thing that you make it on a different machine or something like this. It's a similar process. It's just you've chosen all these other things that you probably would never choose for the average interior page of a book. I mean, you might choose it for some special interior page, but you wouldn't generally choose it. So making the cover is usually completely different from making an interior page because of all the different choices. So yes, you still do the CMYK, separation the same, you still fix all that stuff, so you're going to want to do all of the stuff that I already said for interior pages, but then you've just got a whole other suite of things that come on top here, and here's what they are. So the first thing is you're going to have to work with your printer for that paper selection process way more closely because there's so many options you have. I mean, there's things that I don't even know exactly what it is. Like this Ski Journal magazine, for example, is something called soft touch laminate. It's not the same as a matte finish. So it is a type of dull finish designed to make this part stand out and also to have a smooth feel to it, but it's not matte paper. I mean, or it isn't, it's matte paper with something done to it, right? So there are many more options that a printer may have for paper that you would never care about for the interior of the book, but you might care about them for the cover. And similarly, a lot of the stuff that you wouldn't really do on the interior of the book, you might want to do for the cover. This is one example. So I showed you how this part here, it's specially glossy. So what's happening there? Well, in addition to the CMYK image that you give to the printer for the cover, you can also give the printer a series of masks, and these are basically pure white images with just a black, just pure black drawn to isolate a region. So just like you would use like a layer mask or something, it's exactly that idea. But instead of being used in the actual production of the artwork, what it is it's just something that says where a specific print pass should apply to the cover. So for example, in this case, what you would have done is they would have made their cover normally with like CMYK, and then they would have had a special separate file with just like black for the Ski Journal title. And then the printer would have been told to use that mask to do a glossy pass to coat the finished product after printing just in that area with the glossy coating. And that's what makes this reflective on top of a non-reflective page, right? So there's lots of things that you can do with those masks depending on what your printer's capabilities are. You just saw one of them, which is a glossy post pass. That is typically called spot gloss or spot UV. The word UV is a very strange thing. I don't really understand why they chose to use it. But what it really means is effectively the third time gloss. Remember I said uncoated, no gloss on the paper. Matte, X amount of gloss on the paper. Glossy is like 2X amount on the paper. And then they actually sometimes call it UV coating if you then take that glossy paper and put a third gloss pass after you've done the ink. So spot UV or spot gloss is just a way of saying it's the same as when we do a normal UV pass, which is put the whole gloss over the whole thing. But instead of going over the whole thing, we're just going to do it in certain spots. Hence, spot UV or spot gloss. That's what you saw there, was like a spot gloss finish. And by the way, since we hit our stretch goal for that, that is what the Meow cover will have too. It will have a section that's shiny like that because we thought that was a pretty classy, we liked that look when we were looking at graphic novels that had it. But you can do other things too. Another one is embossing. So a printer can literally like punch into the paper and like deform. If it's a heavy enough weight paper, they can deform out the paper so that there's like a raised section. And again, you provide them a mask for that and they can raise the section. They can do foils, and these are like little metallic, like actual metallic pieces that get pressed onto the paper so that they actually have like a, metal, it's a totally different like material, like a metal material that gets put on there, right? And then finally, I don't even know if our particular printer does this because we didn't ask them since we don't actually want it, but then there's custom inks. So this is the part where hopefully now no one has to remind me. If you're doing a print process and you want some kind of custom inks for your cover, there are lots of crazy, ridiculous options that I didn't explore because we didn't want them, but they are out there. There are fluorescent inks that can reproduce those kinds of fluorescent glowy colors. My understanding is they fade over time. So that's why you typically don't use them as the ink that you're going to use normally. There's metal inks. So there are inks with actual like copper in them or silver probably. I mean, I don't really know what all the different kinds they have available are. Because like I said, we didn't care about that. But there are actual metal doped inks. So you can do an ink pass that can be very detailed, but so not like big blocky things for like embossing or the spot UV, but like super detailed ink pass with metal shining inks, right? It exists. There's scratch resistant inks. These are inks that are designed not to really slough off even in like sort of extreme circumstances. And my understanding is they use these for like printing like box stuff, like that are going to be handled a lot or things like that. So there's a ton of different things you can do with the cover that you probably would never do with the interior, but it exists. So be aware of it, and if these are the kind of things you want for your cover, because maybe you want a crazy cover, those are things you can talk to your printer about. Now, in terms of the physical layout of the cover, it's different than a page. The pages are normally laid out one way, and we'll talk about those as we roll into the actual sheet printing process. But the cover is not. So the cover is typically made separate, and it's usually going to be like one continuous image that has the back, the spine, and the front all together because you want it to sort of wrap around the book, and you want it to be a continuous image the whole way, right? So you don't see like a gap along that fold. Also, if there are flaps, if the way that, sometimes books, they might have a dust jacket if it's a hardcover, or they might have built-in flaps even if it's a trade paperback or something like that. That's probably part of your cover image too. But again, these are things every printer has different things they want. So they'll tell you what you want to do. But the important thing to remember is like cover is made separately. It's not the same dimensions as your book. It's different and you need to be aware of that. You especially need to be aware of the fact that the spine for your book, the size of the spine in that image will be determined by how thick the book is, because the amount of image that is shown on that spine is based on the page count and the paper weight, right? So that's how thick the book will be. So you can't go making your cover. You can make the image for your cover ahead of time maybe, or most of it, but you can't go making your final cover artwork with the wraparound spine until you actually know what paper you want and how many pages the book is. So again, something to keep in mind with when you're making this process. But basically, other than the fact that you have a lot of crazy options that you might want to take advantage of, and you're going to use slightly different dimensions that your printer will be able to tell you. Like the printer will be able to tell you, here's how wide your spine is going to be, right? They've got that information. It's pretty much the same process otherwise, right? It's just you're making CMYK images that look good. It's a different dimension, but it still goes through that process. And then you might paint a bunch of extra masks if you've got all these crazy effects. Spot gloss, foils, embossing, whatever else might be going on there, right, that your printer can do. You might even have whole other ink passes if you're using those metallic inks or some other kind of special ink, right? But otherwise, yeah, same process, just more of it, right? Like more things come in here, because while you don't want to pay for all that for the interior of the book, because man, it would be very expensive if you're doing tons of passes through the press for every page. The book cost would be potentially very high, right? your cover is an important thing. It's what you're going to show off at like trade shows and that sort of stuff. If you're ever in a bookstore or in a display, that's what people are going to see. There's an intangible feel to it when you pick it up, right? You want the book to feel good and look good, all that stuff. The cover is part of that, and so you tend to spend a little bit more money on the cover to get those things. And plus, even if you had infinite money and were just looking to blow it, do you really want weird foils on every I mean, it's going to get distracting. So you're kind of talking more about a specialty kind of book that you would do that to. You could see certain graphic novels that had a certain visual style to them might actually want to start doing like foil printing or weird stuff on the interior, right? And you could imagine that making sense, but it not for a story-based, more long-form story-based thing like Meow. It would just be weird and distracting. You're supposed to be like immersed in this story, and there's all these crazy reflective foils, in your face, whatever. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But you can imagine probably in your head the book that would make sense for. So it's not like it's only confined to the cover. You could do something wow if you want to there. Again, same process. Printing masks and telling the printer what mask goes with which effect. That's really all you're talking about.